Alright guys, I got another comics related video for you here today, since I have picked up yet another independent Iron Age comic that I do want to discuss, because I have Ghost of the Badlands from RazörFist, which, for anyone who doesn't know, RazörFist is a content creator who I've actually followed for quite a long time now. I think I first discovered Razor back in high school through the 8-Bit podcast, of all things. So that should tell you how old I am. But yeah, I followed his work for quite a while. I've been a big fan of his. I always find his takes to be interesting and highly entertaining, even when I disagree with him on something. So when I saw that he was putting out his own Iron Age work, it's definitely something that I had to jump on. Which I believe Razor actually coined the term Iron Age. At least he was the first creator I heard use that term. So I was definitely interested in this as soon as I saw the initial promotional materials for it. I'm definitely a big Western fan in general. So an Iron Age Western from RazörFist sounded right up my alley. So I did pick this up through his Indiegogo campaign, which was last year, I believe. And I actually received this a few months ago, I think back in July, but I just recently had time to get around to actually reading it. So I did want to talk about this book today. Now, as you can see, I do have two different versions of this book, actually. I have both the standard paperback monochrome edition as well as the hardcover deluxe color edition, which both were available through the campaign. I ended up getting both because I couldn't decide which one I wanted more. So the soft cover, the interior artwork is entirely in black and white, while the hardcover is entirely in color. Now, me personally, I think I do prefer the color version, but you really can't go wrong with either one. The artwork is absolutely fantastic. This book was illustrated by George Alexopoulos, and he did a fantastic job. I can't say enough nice things about his work in this book. I'll try to throw up some comparison images so you can kind of see the difference between the monochrome and the color, which the campaign editions did also include digital copies of these books. So any images I post will be from the digital copies because, for one thing, it's better quality, and for another thing, it's just easier. So if you didn't pick these up during the campaign, there is a mass print available for these now through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and pretty much any place like that. Now, I should point out there are a few differences between the versions I have and the mass print version. For one thing, there are different cover arts for both. Both the monochrome and the color are available in mass print, although I do believe that the mass print version is only the standard edition. As far as I know, the deluxe edition is not available in mass print. So if you want the deluxe, you will have to track down one of the initial campaign prints through the secondary market. Which the deluxe editions do include a handful of extra contents towards the back of the book, which I'll go over here briefly. But just getting into the quality of the physical books themselves, both of them are excellent print quality, both the paperback and the hardback. High quality paper, very nice image quality on everything. Absolutely no complaints as far as the physical product goes. Now, as far as the content of the book itself, both the standard and deluxe editions do include the 108-page comic Ghost of the Badlands, as well as an additional 7-page short story called As Wax Before Flame, which is a prequel to the comic story. Again, I'm not totally sure if the mass print version includes that 7-page short story or not. Someone who knows for sure can correct me in the comments. But both the versions I received did include that short story. And then, additionally, the deluxe edition does include an extra 43 pages or so of concept art, some guest illustrations from various artists, as well as the original script for the comic, and some early pencils for the artwork as well. So, as usual, before I get too deep into spoiler territory, I did want to just give my general thoughts about the story itself. Which, if you couldn't tell, I did absolutely love this book. I found the story to be very good. I thought the characters were very compelling. Overall, it was a very simple story. It wasn't complex, but it didn't need to be. It definitely did everything that it needed to do to pull you into the world and to get you invested into the characters. I found the character of the ghost himself to definitely be very badass. He's meant to be this sort of enigmatic, mysterious entity who just appears out of the ether and deals out righteous justice to the sinners of the Arizona desert. Which we get to see quite a bit of in this story. All the action and gunfights are definitely a highlight of the book. Which there are definitely some heavy Christian themes in this book, but it's not done in a sort of like preachy, Bible thumping, browbeating sort of way. It's done in service to the story. Since the ghost himself is actually not the main protagonist of the book, the main protagonist is another character named Righty Redstone, who is a very sinful man who is trying to change his ways and walk the righteous path. So the Christian messaging in the book definitely does tie into the main character's story. It's done in a very tasteful, very logical way, and doesn't feel like it's just beating you over the head the whole time or anything like that. Not that I expected anything like that, but, just to make that clear. But this book is set in 1896 in Canyon Diablo, Arizona, which actually was a real place. Leading up to the release of this book, Razor actually did put out a series of ghost stories videos talking about some of the real-world inspiration for the setting and various characters in the book, which I'll put a link to those in the description if you want to check those out, which I do highly recommend them. I did find them quite interesting. They talked about a lot of the symbolism behind the ghost's mask, the ghost's choice and weapon, the double-cross necklace that is seen repeatedly throughout the book and plays an important role in the story. So, the extra insight provided by those videos was very helpful. So, with that being said, I do want to dive into spoiler territory now, so we will be going through the entire story of the book. So if you do plan on reading this and you don't want to know anything that happens, you should act accordingly now. But diving right in here, we do open right into the action with our main character, Righty Redstone, lying on the ground in the desert, riddled with bullets, surrounded by a group of bandits, and we immediately get the first appearance of the ghost himself, showing up out of the moonlight, spouting Bible verses, which the ghost speaks entirely in Bible verses every time he appears throughout this story, which definitely adds to the aura of the character and making him, seem like this supernatural being there to deal out the justice of God. But anyway, the ghost shows up and absolutely fucks up these bandit guys in tremendous fashion. We have an excellent gunfight here right off the bat. So all the bandits get taken out, and then we see Righty lying on the ground near death, and he looks over at a small girl who survived the stagecoach fire and the attempted robbery of the stagecoach that the bandits were carrying out. So we see this girl crying on the ground, and we see the ghost come up to take the girl away as Righty ends up passing out from his injuries. So then it jumps ahead a few days to Righty waking up in a bed in Canyon Diablo, recovering from his injuries, where he realizes that his right arm has been amputated from all the shots that it took from the bandits, and he actually ends up immediately deciding to commit suicide. So he picks up his revolver off the nightstand and he's about to blow his brains out, but he stops himself when he notices a letter also on the nightstand that was left by the ghost. So as Righty reads the letter, we do get a flashback showing some of his past, as well as explaining what happened just prior to the scene we just saw. So we learn that Righty was actually a member of this gang of bandits, and he's been spending his years doing a lot of very sinful things, robbing people, murdering people, and who knows what else. But during this particular stagecoach robbery that we just saw the ending of, It turns out that his boss told Righty to kill this little girl that we saw being pulled from the wreckage, and Righty actually refused to kill this girl, and that's why the other bandits turned on him and filled him full of bullets instead. So Righty's moment of conscience in trying to help this little girl is what cost him his right arm and nearly his life entirely. So having seen Righty's moment of mercy, the ghost actually offers Righty the chance to become one of his missionaries and pursue the path of righteousness. So he leaves Righty a double cross necklace, which is the symbol of all of his missionaries, as well as instructions for Righty to go to the town of Two Guns and pick up a telegram from the saloon there with further instructions should he choose to go down this path. So Righty ends up deciding to take up the ghost on his offer, and after recovering he sets out for Two Guns in order to get this telegram. But then we cut away to the mayor's office, where we meet some other important characters to the story. We meet Mayor Eustace Galvin Cantabone, which is one of those characters that you can immediately tell is going to be a villain as soon as you lay eyes on him. Definitely giving off those, boss hog sort of vibes. We also meet the mayor's bodyguard, Mr. Harrow, and his secretary, Mr. Bohm. So we see the mayor asking Mr. Bohm about Righty, and Mr. Bohm telling him that he just left town. So then we rejoin Righty as he goes to the town of Two Guns, and he goes to the saloon and he meets Bart, the saloon's owner, who we soon learn is another one of the ghost missionaries, since he has the double-cross necklace, just like the one that the ghost gave to Righty. So Righty gets the telegram from Bart, and the ghost instructs him to infiltrate the gang called the Crows, who is led by a Navajo Indian named Will Blackfeather. So with some money that Righty also received from the ghost, he buys his way in good with Will Blackfeather and ends up joining his gang as they go out to ambush a stagecoach on a rainy night. But this stagecoach robbery ends up going awry when it turns out that the coach is actually empty, and the driver of the stagecoach is none other than the ghost himself. So we get another really cool gunfight where the ghost starts picking apart the crows and blowing them all away. So the ghost ends up killing most of the gang, but Righty and Will Blackfeather do manage to escape. Meanwhile, we see a girl named Augustine and her family, who were the ones who were supposed to be on that stagecoach but were redirected by the ghost, watching all this happening off in the distance and realizing that, they just got saved by this mysterious stranger. We also see a scene of the ghost recovering a stock for the Pan Western Railway Company that was on the person of one of the dead bandits that he took out. So then it cuts away to elsewhere in the woods where we see Righty and Will camping for the night. And we get a little bit of a backstory for the ghost here. Now, actually I really like the way they did this because they gave you enough to go on, but they still managed to leave some parts of it vague. So the ghost managed to, keep his enigmatic aura. But we did find out at least a tale of what people believe to be where the ghost came from. Since Will tells Righty about a man named E.E. Iyer, who is a big shot lumber guy who actually paid the military to go into the town of Canyon Diablo and burn it to the ground, since Canyon Diablo didn't want to, quote-unquote, civilize, with the rest of the world. So, since they were being a problem, all the big shots got together and basically burned the entire town down. And while this was happening, there was allegedly one man who ran into the fire to save a child and wound up, severely wounding himself in the process. And this guy just ends up sort of disappearing into the desert, and not long after that, the ghost started showing up. So it's implied that this guy who was burned in the flames could end up being the identity of the ghost, but we never really find out who he is, and, it's still left up in the air of whether the ghost is supernatural or not, or just this really pissed off burned guy, since, the wounds were so severe, it could be that this guy died, so maybe, he wandered out into the desert and died, but was revived by God to be his hand of justice or something. So, again, I like how they did that. They left it just vague enough where you can kind of let your mind run wild about it, while also providing some sort of origin story for the ghost and not just having it be, completely a clean slate. So, I think they walked a fine line there, but I think they did a good job in doing so. But this conversation is interrupted by Dietrich, who is a U.S. Marshal, who shows up to arrest both Will Blackfeather and Righty for the stagecoach robbery and the massacre that just happened. So Dietrich ends up taking them back to Canyon Diablo, just in time to see the funeral for the last sheriff that was there, which Dietrich is here actually to become the new sheriff for Canyon Diablo on request from the mayor. So they lock up Will and Righty in the jail, and the marshal ends up asking the mayor if there are any witnesses to the recent stagecoach attacks. So the mayor actually ends up bringing in the young girl who survived the stagecoach attack from the beginning of the book, the girl who Righty refused to kill at his boss's order, who had been staying in the care of a local whore named Clabberfoot Annie. But they bring this girl in, and they ask her if she recognizes any of the men in the cell, and the girl's so traumatized from everything that's happened to her, she's actually become a mute now. But they ask her to just point if she recognizes any of these men. And of course she recognizes Righty, but she also remembers that Righty is the one who spared her life. So she refuses to point him out. So the mayor actually ends up demanding that they let both Will and Righty go, since they have no evidence. And the marshal, being a U.S. Marshal, actually has no jurisdiction out here in the Arizona territory, since Arizona is not a state at this point. So, much to the marshal's chagrin, they end up letting both Righty and Will go. So, Righty goes off into a back alley, where he actually receives another correspondence from the ghost, giving him further instructions. Meanwhile, Will goes off and meets with the mayor, and it is revealed that the mayor has been working with these bandit groups all along, which is the real reason the mayor wanted to let him out of the jail. Since the mayor has been hiring these bandits to harass the local landowners in order to try to get the land deeds from them so he can give the land to the railway company and they can potentially complete the railroad that is going through Canyon Diablo. And of course get rich in the process. So, to the surprise of no one, the mayor turns out to be corrupt and working with the Crows. But fortunately, this conversation is overheard by the mayor's secretary, Mr. Bohm, who is revealed to have one of the double-cross necklaces. So Mr. Bohm is yet another one of the ghost missionaries, and how the ghost has been getting some of his intel. So it then cuts to another scene later where we see Augustine, the lady from earlier on the stagecoach, arriving back at her cabin, and she comes home from grocery shopping to find that the Crows have invaded her home and killed her entire family. And they immediately kidnap her as well in an attempt to get her to sign away the deed to her land. So meanwhile, we see the mayor actually going to the telegram office to look for Mr. Harrow, who he sent there earlier to send a telegram. But when he gets there, no one is there, so he decides to send the telegram himself, where he is talking to one of his cohorts, potentially that E.E. Ayers guy who was mentioned earlier. And he's telling him that he's gotten one of the land titles and he's working on getting the second, and he needs more stocks, for compensation. So as he's sending the telegram, he ends up hearing a mysterious voice, and he goes outside to find Mr. Harrow lying dead on the train tracks, with a bunch of railway stock lying around him. So clearly the ghost has gotten to him. So then it cuts back to Will dragging Augustine into the Apache Death Cave, which is a cave out in the desert where Will tells her this story about an encounter between the Apache Indians and the Navajo, where the Apache had taken some of the Navajo women and kidnapped and struggle-snuggled them. So the Navajo hunted them down and trapped them in this cave and basically burned them alive. So Will is threatening Augustine that, some of the same things that happened to those Navajo women is going to happen to her if she doesn't hand over the deed to her land. But before Will can have her way with her, Righty ends up appearing just in time and taking out some of Will's men and getting into a shootout with Will, where Righty ends up declaring that his name is Paul, and he ends up shooting Will right in between the eyes and taking him out. So Paul Redstone ends up killing Will and saving Augustine and getting her out of the cave. Meanwhile, we have one final sequence, which is probably my favorite sequence in this entire book. We see the mayor freaking out that Mr. Harrow has been murdered, and he sees who he thinks is the marshal coming up, so he runs over to him for help. But of course, it turns out not to be the marshal. It is, in fact, the ghost, who is here to also seek revenge on the mayor. So he ends up shooting the mayor in the shoulder, and the mayor runs away down the tracks, which just leads to an incomplete bridge. So the mayor ends up cornered at the edge of the bridge, and he's pleading with the ghost and, trying to get him not to kill him. But all this leads to the mayor pulling out a derringer and having a shootout with the ghost, which of course ends with the ghost blowing him away and having him fall off the bridge to his death. So, absolutely great scene, excellent ending for the mayor. It's great anytime a scumbag character like that gets what's coming to them. So then in the last scene, we do see Paul take Augustine back to her home and tries his best to console her. And also, importantly, he does leave her one of the double-cross necklaces, implying that potentially Augustine could end up becoming a missionary of the ghost herself. But he ends up leaving her and riding off into the sunset, where we see Paul look up onto the hill, and he sees the ghost standing there, where the ghost comments about Paul being a good, faithful servant, and how he'll make him a ruler over many things, before disappearing into the sunset. And that's the end of the book. So, like I said, an absolute great story. Additionally, again, if you do get the campaign version, there is the short story As Wax Before Flame, which I'm not going to go through the whole plot of that note by note, but it is a prequel story to the comic story, showing one of the previous sheriffs of Canyon Diablo as he ends up trying to save this guy from a collapsing mine, and his encounter with the ghost as well. So, also a nice little story, adding some more to the world building, and getting to see some more of the mayor, before he met his end. But yeah, I really did enjoy this book. It definitely felt like one of those, classic westerns. If you could time travel back to the 1960s and adapt this book into a movie, and you cast Clint Eastwood as Roddy Redstone, it would definitely be one of those films that, people view as a western classic for today. So, I absolutely love this book. If you're a fan of westerns, I think you'll like this book as well. I do highly recommend picking it up. Again, it is available in a mass print version, so it should be easy enough to get your hands on it. If you do want the deluxe edition for the extras, the concept arts, and what have you, I have no idea what kind of price the first edition copies like I have are going for on the second market now. But you can attempt to pursue that as well if you really want those extras. But I do highly recommend this book. I know Razor has talked about potentially doing a sequel to this book, so if that ends up becoming a thing, I'll definitely be picking that up as well. I think this was Razor's first comic. I do know he also has a series of Night Vale novels that I haven't read, but after reading this, I do definitely plan on picking up those as well at some point. But yeah, so I should be back soon with another comics video, because I do have Gooding the Polymath from Rippaverse Comics as well that I do also need to get around to reading. So once I get that read, I'll definitely be covering that book here on this channel as well. But anyhow, I guess that's all I got to say, so lots of luck to you and yours.